All right, Harvey, what day is it today?
Today is December 27, 2021, corresponding to the Kuf Daled Tevet 5782.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I want to give credit where credit is due. The OU has a app on for Daf Yomi. It's called Al Hadaf, and they have an app on the Parsha called Al HaParsha. And I listened this past week to Rabbi Aryeh Leibowitz, that's Billy Gewertz's son-in-law, and he discussed the topic of the Loshino Shemam. The Klal Yisrael Mitzrayim didn't change their names. They used the Jewish names and not the Egyptian names. And he talked about what's the status nowadays. Are you allowed to use a? Should you use a Could you use a non-Jewish name? Should you, if your name is Harry or Jack, should you change it?
Jack is not.
No, Jewish name.
Well, that's an in between because like Jacob is
Yeah.
halfway. So that's the question. Is it okay? A lot of the people in this community have gone through name changes. They used to be one name and now they're a different name, especially some of the young people. So is that advisable, recommended? What's the story? So it's a very, very fascinating topic. So, and I found the tshuva from Rav Asher Weiss where he discusses it at some length, and that made it easier to prepare this year. So let's look at first at page 2. In the Chumash it says Ve'elu Shmos B'nei Yisrael Habayim Mitzrayim. It's very timely because it has to do with this week's parsha. Ve'elu Shmos B'nei Yisrael Habayim Mitzrayim. The opening verse in the parsha. So Rashi says, the Baal Turim rather. Baal Turim was the author of the Tur. He's the father of the Rosh. He lived about 700 years ago. So he says, what? He's the son of the Rosh. Is that right? I said the other way? Yes, the son of the Rosh. So he says, Ve'elu Shmos B'nei Yisrael Habayim, Rosh, where I have it underlined, Rashi Tevos Shivas. The Baal Turim is famous for finding Rashi Tevos and Gematrias. The people have said that the Sefer was written in Ruach HaKodesh, because how did he manage to think of all these things? So the Rashi Tevos of Eila Shemos B'nei Yisrael Habayim, Shin Beis Yud Hey, Rashi Tevos Shivya, which means captive. Shafilu Kishahayu B'Shivya, even when the Jewish people were in captivity, nonetheless, Shemos B'nei Yisrael, they retain the Jewish names. Shelo Shinu Shemosan, because they didn't change their names. So he says Chazal say there's 3 reasons why they were nigal from Mitzrayim, and one of them is because Shloshino Shemosam. Now in the Medrash it says that there were 4 reasons, not 3 reasons. Right underneath is the Medrash Rabbah in Parshas Emor. So the Medrash says, if you look at the top line of the Medrash says, Rav Huna Amar B'Shem Bar Kafra, B'Shvil Daled Dvarim Nigal Yisrael Mitzrayim. There's 4 reasons why the Jewish people were redeemed from Mitzrayim. What are the 4 reasons before we see it inside? They didn't change their names. They didn't change Mabusham.
The language, names,
Right.
Shonim.
Yeah.
Right. Well, 3 things. They didn't change their names. They didn't change their language, and they didn't change their clothing. Okay, where does that come from? They didn't change their clothing. You won't find it in the Medrash. In the Medrash it says, B'shvil dal dvarim nigal Yisrael Mitzrayim. Shloshinos Shmam, Veslashonam. They didn't change their names. They didn't change their language. V'lo amru lashon hara. They didn't speak lashon hara. V'lo nimsa b'neihem echad mehem paratz be'erva. And none of them were engaged in licentious behavior. Loshina, or immoral behavior. And then the Medrash gives an example. He goes through each one, but I only cut this part out. Loshina Shemam, Reuven v'Shimon Nachsin, Reuven, Shimon, Solkin. When Reuven and Shimon came down to Mitzrayim, they were Reuven and Shimon. And when they left Mitzrayim, their names were Reuven and Shimon. They didn't go through a name change. Loho Yukar Yehuda Rupa. They didn't call Reuven Yehuda Rupa, which is a Roman name. Lo Reuven Luliani. V'lo Yosef Lastes, v'lo Vinyanim Alexandri. Now, why? What? Those are not Egyptian names; those are Roman names. So, why is it telling me that they didn't have Roman names? So why would they have Roman names if they were in Egypt? So the pshat in the Medrash, though, is the Medrash is just using contemporary examples that they were familiar with. They were familiar with these names of Rufa and Luliani. How exactly Yehuda gets to Rufa and Reuven gets to Luliani? Some of the Mefarshim explain that on the side of the Medrash. But in any event, they didn't change their names. They kept their Hebrew names. And now in the Baal Turim, he says that there were three reasons that they didn't change their name, that they were Negal. He says the piece above that we just read. There are three reasons. Now, the reason why he says there's three reasons and the Medrash says there's four reasons is because if you see in the little bracket there, it says where the source of the Baal Turim is. He's not quoting a Medrash. He's quoting Pei Daled Reish Aleph. What does that stand for? Pirkei de Belazar, which is one of the there's many different types of midrashim. So one of them is called Pirkei de Belazar. Pirkei de Belazar, Parak Mem Ches. So in Pirkei de Belazar it says there were three reasons, but in the Medrash Rabbah it says there were four reasons. Now neither place does it say that Shaloshinu Es Malbusham, and that's all the kids when they come home from school all know the Loshinu Es Malbusham, but it's one of those mysteries. Like where did it come from? So how do you find out? You Google it and you type in the question, where does it say Goshinos Malusham? And you find long blogs about where is the source for that. And apparently there's a psikta, which is also a type of medrash, where there it says Goshino as Malbusham. But the Medrash Rabbah says that they didn't change their Lashonam and the Shmam, and they didn't speak Lashon Hara, and they weren't immoral. So the Gevuras Ari, which is the Gevuras Hashem, which is the Maral and Pesach, explains why those things were critical for the Geula to take place. So he says, this is just before we get into the topic, the halachic topic about whether you should have non-Jewish names, but before we just to understand the concept. The Hashem says, "V'od siba," on the bottom of the page. "V'od siba l'ulas Yisrael amru b'shir hashirim." He quotes another medrash who says the same thing in Shir Hashirim. B'pasuk ben no gano revun b'shem v'rakafram b'schus dal dvarim nigal Yisrael Mitzrayim. There were four reasons why they were nigal. It's schus of four things. So if you look further, where I underlined Pirish Hamayim Razeh, Ki Geula Shel Mitzrayim Hay B'Shvil Shel Hay Misachtem Mitzrayim. The Geula was able to take place because the Jewish people were not swallowed up by Mitzrayim. They weren't unified with Mitzrayim. Because if they would have been unified with the Egyptians, they couldn't have been extracted. Maybe they could have left, but they would still be Egyptians. If they would have changed their names to Egyptian names, or they would have spoken Egyptian, which I guess is Arabic, then the Jewish people would have been connected to them and wouldn't have been able to go out. How does Lashon Hara fit in? Lashon Hara, they didn't speak Lashon Hara, so he says, in the left side, if they would speak Lashon Hara, when you speak Lashon Hara, what you do is you're revealing something secretive. You go over to somebody and say, guess what I found out today? Did you know? So if it's public knowledge, you don't have to tell anybody because everybody knows. So it's something that's unknown or not well known. So if they would be Megal So to the Egyptians, by revealing secrets to the Egyptians and things that are relevant to their essence, so that would have also created a bond with the Egyptians, because you don't reveal secrets to people that are strangers. And certainly, if they would have been immoral, if they would have had affairs with the Egyptians, sexual relationships, that would even be the strongest relationship. Chacham say that that's why these four things were critical for the Yetziat Mitzrayim, because they were living in Mitzrayim. Lo kamo hagoluya shehem ata sheyisrael kvar nasu am, And now it's different. It was when they were in Mitzrayim, it wasn't the same as it is now, because now the Jewish people are a nation. Even when they were in Galus, we're still Klal Yisrael, we're still Jews. If when Mashiach will come, there's not going to be a problem, even if we speak Roman or whatever language. There's not going to be a problem because we're a separate entity because we identify ourselves as Jews.
A little problem. I mean, we're 70% intermarriage.
Okay, all right. Well, but he's not talking about Enochinami. Okay, but he was talking at his time when they didn't have intermarriage like that, rampant intermarriage.
They'll tell us even in the time of Mitzrayim, when the Gullus really started, is when they really started mixing with the Egyptians, and they were going to the theaters and other things.
Okay, but still there was some level of separation.
Yeah, those were those four things.
Those are the four things. But when they were still in Mitzrayim, they were not yet unified as a people. They didn't become a nation until they left Mitzrayim. If they wouldn't have protected themselves, not to have allowed changes in their makeup, okay, so as you're saying, they wouldn't have been able to go out of Mitzrayim if they would have melted or blended into the Egyptian society and the Egyptian culture. So this kept them distinct and separate. So now the question is, what's the story? If you see that in Mitzrayim it was a positive thing that they didn't change their names, what's the story nowadays?
Can I just point out that he understands Lo Lashon Hara to mean specifically to the Egyptians,
Yes.
which is
Not our
an
traditional.
assumption. The Midrash doesn't say that.
Okay, that's a good point, but that's how he understands the Medrash. The Medrash just says they didn't say Lashon Hara. He's saying it means that they didn't say Lashon Hara to the Egyptians. That's how he's interpreting the Medrash. That they didn't tell Lashon Hara to the Egyptians.
The Medrash say also later on when Moshe was, after Moshe kills the Egyptian and you see the two Jews
Yeah,
fighting.
that's
I
another
think
way.
don't they say that is referring to the fact that they knew that he knew that they were in Galus because they were speaking Lashon Hara?
Yes, it does.
But that's a minority.
Yes, it does. But you could say that's only like
It's
that
minority.
particular.
But
incident.
it says there Lashon Hara?
Yeah.
Why?
It says
They were
Moshe
fighting.
says, why are these people worthy to go out? They speak Lashon Hara about each other.
Is that what Rashi says? That they spoke Lashon Hara?
That's not the majority. It's a very small minority.
Maybe it's just
It says. I mean, they weren't speaking. There's yeah.
But Moshe says Achinu Hadavar as a response to when they said, are you going to kill us?
Yeah, I know. Moshe said that. I understand now why they're in Golos. But does it say because of Lashon Hara or?
I think it does. Larry, you got it.
Yeah, it's up on the higher shelves. That's where.
I'm so short I can't hardly ever see that. So.
You can also get it in the Ramban.
So what does it say?
Yeah, sure, that'd be an interesting partial.
No, it's in the.
Ramban.
It's last week's parsha.
Dustin, yeah.
It's like Perek.
Well, it says, Rashi says about Dasan Vavir.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it says Ochein.
Here we go.
Where does it say?
Now this one's not. Kishma Madrasha Nelly Adavar Shehaisi Tamalov. Machato Yitzhakal Ali Nomas Leaskida Rosbara.
Where does it say Ochein no Lahadavar?
Anishem Ruyim Lekach. It's not exactly what he's talking about Lashon Hara, but it seems like that's what he's saying.
Oh, here. Ochein no Lahadavar.
And Pasuk
So Rashi says, "Lo Lahadavar Shisa Tamala Machato Mishom Mikoshim Umos Abrayni Shehem Ruim Lekach." But he doesn't say.
Well, it's tattletale.
It doesn't say that they spoke Lashon Hara. In the previous Rashi, it says, "V'yir Moshe, Dago al Shirab Yisrael B'Shaim Delotorin." Delotorin means what? Tattletellers. Yeah. Amar Me'ata Shema Ein Rui Ligal. But why? I don't know why that was the fact that they were fighting, but they weren't tattletaling each other.
No, but why did he have to run from there? He had to run because Moshe told Paro that
They told Paro.
he killed the Mitzri. That's why you had to run.
Right. Okay. So what, I'm asking, what's the pshat? Where does it? What does it have to do with they weren't tattletelling?
Moshe was trying to intercede. They were fighting on their own. Moshe was trying to intercede.
And they said to him,
They said to him,
They said to him.
Al Hargani Atom Kasher Harak
"Harat the Mitzri."
Right?
Yeah. So that wasn't lashon hara. They were. I mean, they were.
Hold on.
I think it's the title.
All right. Be as it may.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. It has to be looked at. So anyway, that's what the Medrash says. So Rav Asher Weiss on first page, so he quotes the Baal Turim in the first paragraph, and in the second paragraph, on the first page, he says, "V'hine nishalti l'gabi rabbi me'achenu b'medinas hayam." Many people outside of Israel have asked me. In Israel, they didn't ask him because in Israel, they have Jewish names, or at least Israeli names. But the people out in Chutz La'aretz ask, "Shenogim mishtamid baskeim ubekishreim b'gayim b'shemis nachrim." They use secular names when they interact in the non-Jewish world. Ha'im ovrim be'isser, is it also for them to use non-Jewish names? Ha'im roi lin hokain, and is it appropriate to do that? V'navar al parshas Sodom. We're going to review this sugya, this issue. So he says, "Divrei haposkim b'dor Raseim matzim ezeh deis chalukos min hakotzel hakotzel kan kan." We find two extremes of opinions. B'shal sechuvas maram shik kosav de'eshvus isser deraisa. The osarong hidamos l'gayim l'lechus b'chukasein. The maram shik says that you're over isser deraisa because the pasuk says v'avdel eschem min amim that you're required. You're not allowed to imitate the gayim. You have to do. You cannot copy their behavior. And then just where I underlined it, v'chein kos b'shal shusav and spaneach l'gam mirogachav. The also l'shtanas l'shemis l'gayim. The Rogachover also said that you're not allowed to use non-Jewish names. The Rogachover lived in the beginning of the 20th century. The Maram Shik was a Hungarian posek. He was he was a Talmud of Chassam Sofer, and after Chassam Sofer died, he was probably the preeminent posek in Hungary. The Maram Shik. Rabbi Malitsky's mother, Rabbi Malitsky's father's his father's grandfather was a shik. His father's grandfather was a rabbi shik, and Rabbi Shik was a rav in the Bronx, and he died at a very young age. And he was married to Renee Shik, and she was in order to support the family. She was Rebbetzin Shik. She opened a bakery. You'll never guess what the name of the bakery was. Shik's, and she built it up from a little hole in the wall. She had no income, so the Rabbi Malitsky is from his mother's side. No, from his father's mother's side. His father, I guess, his father's mother's father was Rabbi Shik. So he descends from the Shik family. So I asked Rabbi Malitsky, are you a grandchild, a great grandchild of the Maram Shik, or are you a someplace else along the line, the lineage line? So he says we always assumed that we were direct descendants of the Maram Shik, but recently somebody said that they thought that they were not direct. We're maybe just cousins.
So our next door neighbor, I guess, was his great uncle, Alan Shik.
Your next door neighbor is what?
This is Alan Shik,
Yeah.
Renee's son,
Your next door neighbor where?
in Silver Spring, when I was growing up.
And Alan Shik is who?
He's Renee's son.
Oh, he's Renee's son.
My
Okay.
brother's twin.
So what did he say? Did he say he was from the Maram Shik?
And also, they discovered about 25 years ago that they were not direct descendants.
Oh, 25 years ago already discovered it. So Rabbi Malitsky, let's say he's not sure. I said, what do you mean not sure? Just look on the internet, do a search, you'll find out. It's easy to find out who's
Actually went to Utah.
what?
He went to Utah to the
Mormons.
Who went to Utah? Alan?
And Aaron Shik, I think he's married to Strauss, right?
Married to?
Yes,
That's the Strauss son-in-law.
Yes, he's son-in-law.
Oh, his name is Aaron?
His name is Ari.
Ari.
Aaron Shik, he was my.
Oh, so he's the one that you live next door to him, yeah. Yeah, he's a Shik, right, he's also Shik.
And actually did the research, and it turns out I think that they are second cousins.
And by the way, you don't have to go to Utah. It's in New York. The Mormon Center in New York. You can get all the rest.
You don't have to go any place. You can sit in front of
New
a
York 25
computer.
years ago.
Rabbi Malitsky looked on the computer and he found it. He says he's not, his great-great-great-grandfather was a brother to the Maram Shik. Maram Shik is Ramosha Shik. So he's not a Ben Acher Ben, but he is related, he's related to the Shik family, which is also, I told Rabbi Malitsky that now I know why you're more passionate than I am, because the Maram Shik was very passionate. He fought, like his Rebbe, the Chassam Sofer, battled against the reform. The Maram Shik also took over the banner took over the baton, the fighting against the reform. And he was a very passionate person. You'll see in a minute, I'll show you his tshuva, you'll see that he's, the way he writes the tshuva, he was a big kanoi. So the Maram Shik, the Maram Shik lived in the 1800s. He died in 1879, I think. So he lived in the 19th century. And then he says, but the Sofnas Panech, there was the Rogatchover. The Rogatchover was one of the greatest geniuses in the last few hundred years. The Rogatchover Gaon, yes. He lived in the same city as Rameir Simcha, the Or Sameach in Dvinsk. One was a Hasidish and one was Misnagid, and they had many disputes. You know the famous story about the Rogatchover with Rav Chaim. I think it was with Rav Chaim Brisker, because the Rogatchover said that he had a chakira. Is when a person is mikadosh an isha, is a mikadosh once and then they remain married forever, or is there a new Maisa Kedushin every moment of their marriage? It's like because the Maisa Kinyan continues. So supposedly Rav Chaim Brisker said, according to you, is kum tira mazel tov. You get a mazel tov because you're getting married every second. So anyway, so he says that the Meida in the next paragraph, Meida Kosem Shal Shivas Moshe Dem Bezisaklau. Russia totally disagrees, and Russia says there's no isser. Based on the morale, what would you say based on the morale? So the basis of the isser is because that's what we're going to see. But the prime basis is that in Mitzrayim they didn't change their names. So if they didn't change their names, so we shouldn't be changing our names either. So, that's a very good point. What about our language? And what about our dress? That's excellent points. But we're jumping ahead. Oh, what about Lashon Hara?
Let's not get carried away, okay?
Yeah, and that reminds me. I told this story probably a few times. There was somebody called me up. They had a major problem in their life. So they wanted to know, what kapitel Tillim can I say that will be like a skula, that the problem will go away? So I said, I don't know, I'm not into skulas, but I said, what you should do is do machzum lefi, which is choose an hour a day when you won't speak Lashon Hara. Don't choose when you're sleeping. Choose an hour in the day, and that'll be a bigger skula than saying kapitel Tillim. So they said, for how long? I said, well, at least a month, 2 months, or definitely. So the person, no Lashon Hara, can't do it. Don't you know a kapitel Tehillim that I could say that will be a school? That's the thing. There are things that are that's why I don't like schools, because they're like the magic bullet. You don't have to do anything. It's like you go to the doctor. You don't have to take care of yourself. You take a pill and you get better. The doctor says you have to exercise, you have to eat healthy. No, just give me a pill, so I'll get better. So, but anyway, that's a good question about why. How do you? If the basis to say that it's osur is because Lashino is as Lashonam. Shino Shmosam. So what about the fact that we don't speak anymore Hebrew? We changed our language. So the Ramesh is going to make that point. Hopefully we'll get to it later tonight. So he says, okay, so let's see the tshuva of the Maram Shik. That's on page 3. By the way, according to the Maral says that in Mitzrayim that it was only when they were in Mitzrayim that they needed to be for Geula, they needed to be distinct and separate. But nowadays it's not necessary. So according to Maral, it would seem that it's not necessary to maintain Jewish names. Okay, so here's on page 3. This is from the Maharam Shik. The reason Maharam is an acronym for Morein Harav Moshe. His name was Rav Moshe Shik. So he says, "Be'ezus Hashem Yisrael Yom Aleph Nitzam Tov Reish Lamed Ches." When was Tov Reish Lamed Ches? It was, now we're up to Pei Aleph, so that's about 1830.
Sorry,
No.
1860.
It's about 144 years. 144 years ago was 144 was about 1870.
1877.
Well, he died in 1879.
Yeah.
So this is right before he died. And he says where he was living, Khust, the famous city in Hungary of Khust. I think my mother-in-law was from Khust. My father-in-law was from Munkach, and my mother-in-law was from Khust. So he says, L'shana Tovi Yikasu Yichasim L'at L'chaim Tov Aruchim Usukim, and he's writing to the Hatarani HaMuflag Meir Kalish. So he says, Umnon she'ein ani yodei l'chanos oso, mikom makom, I don't know what that means, l'chanos oso. Mikom makom ra'isi sh'roy l'hashav ha'davar she'sha'ol she'yesh, I have to answer your question. She'yesh b'nei adam she'mechanim atzmam v'shem ha'goyim. They use the nicknames of the goyim. Umaloso neiwayo hachiach osam, and you gave them musar. The Harei Amru b'Medrash b'schus shalosh tina shmam zechina l'tzeis Mitzrayim. The because they didn't change their names, that's why they went on Mitzrayim. So you see that it's not appropriate to have a non-Jewish name. V'hem mishivim shalazed dai b'mesh yesh l'hem shem Yehudi l'krosim b'al Torah. They said, what do you want? That in Mitzrayim, the Medrash says means that they had a Jewish name. So we also have a Jewish name. It's just we don't use it all the time. When we get an Aliyah, we use the Jewish name. So the Maharam Shik responds to that. You see already from the way he writes it, there's intensity. He says that's stupidity. Because it's definitely Asr Midrash. Because of a Rambam, Parak Out Milchs of Azara, the Mikri Mola Namar Besol Parashas Kedoshim, Va'avdal Eschem Min Amim, Leosli. The Medrash says, the pasuk says that I separated you from the nations to belong to me. From the Sifri says, from there we're going, you're not allowed to emulate the non-Jews. Just like we're not allowed to copy their clothing, because in the time of the Maharam Shik, the Jews did not dress the same way as the non-Jews. The Jews wore beaver hats and long beckershires and things like that.
Maybe where he lived.
Where he lived in Chus. Chus was a Chassidish place. And certainly, if you're not allowed to copy their clothing, you're certainly not allowed to copy their names. We should emulate the time of when they were in Golus in Mitzrayim. It says they were Goy Gadol. That the Jewish people, we have them in the Haggadah. Mitziyanim means that they were distinct.
The Rambam is perhaps not the best person to quote this. He wrote in Arabic.
I hear. Well, let's see the language of the Rambam. The Rambam, I put it on page 8. The Rambam says, in the end of Hilchos Avodah Zarah, Parakid Aleph, Ein holchem b'chuka salvit chochavim. You're not allowed to follow the ways of the non-Jews. Lo medamim lehem, lo b'malbush. You're not allowed to emulate their clothing. Lo b'seyar. You're not allowed to emulate their hairstyles. The kiyotze v'hem shenever v'lo seilchu b'chukas hagoyim. The Pasuk says you're not allowed to follow the culture of the goyim. The number of chok doesn't mean culture, but it means the things that are. Culture is like a chok, because a chok is something that you're bound. You have to do it. It doesn't, whether you understand it, you don't understand it. You have to do it. Remember, Hussein was Selechem. Another passage says you're not allowed to follow the chukim of the goyim. Remember, Hishamacham ben Tinaka Shachareim. A number of psukim in Sefer Dvarim. Be careful unless you follow after them. Hakol be'inyan echad hu mazir. They're all the same isser. Shelo yedam lehem. That we're not allowed to be like the non-Jews. Eliyah Yisrael moved them mehem. The Jewish people have to be separate. V'yadu b'malbusho, and they have to be distinct in their clothing. Uvishar ma'asav. Kamosha who moved them mehem b'mado uvideyosef. Just like we're separate in terms of our value system. V'cheinu omer v'avdei eschem min ha'amim lo yubush b'malbush hamiyuchel lehem. From the pasuk v'avdei eschem we learn that you're not allowed to wear clothing that's distinct that they would wear. You're not allowed to have long braided hair like they have. And they used to have some kind of tomahawk haircut to cut off the sides. You're not allowed to cut the hair from one side of your face to the other, and to have a ponytail on the back. You're not allowed to build stadiums. So Rambam is pretty clear that you're not allowed in any way to emulate the Goyim. So the Maram Shik says that for number one, you see Mitzrayim Loshino as Shmam, and secondly, there's an issue deraisa to change the name, because the Rambam says you have to be distinct in all ways. So you're going to call yourself a non-Jewish name, so you're emulating the non-Jews, and therefore you're violating all these isurim of chukas, which chukas hagayim is like the generic name for it, but it's the same idea. You're not allowed to follow the ways of the non-Jews.
But does he mention Shemos, or does he just only mentions the Malbush?
No, he doesn't mention Shemos, but the Maran Shik, when he quotes the Rambam, he says, the Kol Shekain, you see in the first paragraph, at the very end, he says, the Rambam says, you're not allowed, you're not allowed to copy their clothing and their minhagim. He holds it's a kol shekain in the name, because the name is much more personal than everything else. All right, I was going to say something, but I forgot what I was going to say. So so he says that a name is more is a kal v'chomer from because dress is external. But a name is who you are. That identifies who the... Dale Carnegie wrote a book of how to influence. Yeah, I read it when I was 18 years old, and it made a very, very big impact on me. So the one thing I remember very distinctly and clearly is that he said, what did he say?
So you say the person's name.
He said the most precious thing for any person is their name. People want to be called by their names. If you want to ingratiate yourself to somebody or to become, make them feel that you're their friend, use their name, because that is like music to their ears. He in general, Dale Carnegie had tremendous insight into human nature. But as he said, that the people, because that's who I am. If I don't have a name, the Nazis, Yimach Shemam, what did they do? They took away people's names. Instead of names, they had numbers. That's why they have this program, Names Not Numbers, because it's the opposite of what the Nazis wanted. The Nazis dehumanized the people by giving the numbers. Who gets branded with numbers? Cattle. So they made them into animals. Every cow, there's some cows who are named Elsie, I guess, but most cows don't have names. They're just a cow. Okay, nowadays they give names to dogs and to cats and to birds. I don't know. But birds they don't give names to, right? Usually they do? They give birds names too?
Yeah, man.
Yeah? How about fish? Do they name fish?
Gold Opie. Can make Kiddush on Shabbos. The bird can make Kiddush.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I
What
just
about
wanna
if you're
point-
giving the name because you like the name, not because you're imitating the Goyim?
That's a very good question. And what's what does it mean imitating the Goyim? It means anything that they do. If we do it, that's called that we're imitating the Goyim.
They wear shoes.
Yeah, they wear shoes and they.
The kind of shoes they wear.
Yeah.
Hadas Mainonios, Aleph, on that Rambam says, Shein lehoshif mispara al mashim manu chachamim, shehayta kabbalah b'yadam shu mechu kotav lekochavim.
He says that we can't add on which things are considered being that we're imitating the Goyim.
Right.
Only those things that are listed in Chazal.
Name,
Right, meaning he would disagree with Maran.
Right. It doesn't because the Ram doesn't say anything about the names.
Right, that-
Chazal them.
They're Chazal, right?
Now, Gimel is the exception. Yisrael Shaya Torah L'Malchus Torah Le'Shem L'Fnei Malchem Hayolo Tonight. There's a case in Gemara. I remember it was somebody who was, even though he had his haircut differently, was still going to have.
Right. If you're doing it for practical reasons,
So the question
in
is,
order
how
in
far-
order to be politically acceptable.
Right.
So that goes to what Jesse said. Well, let's say you want to dress like everybody else, so you could function in the business world. If you're gonna wear a beaver hat, they're not gonna want to do business with you. Okay, we'll see. This is all a very good question. Put it in abeyance for a few minutes. Maybe I'll see if I have time to come back to it. So let's see. Let's just see the whole tshuva. Uviyoser bi or Martia Kavana, the second paragraph. He says, I explained it even further. The Hine, the Yossi Rav, the Kilo Kadisha Yergin. He held a rabbinic position in a number of cities. So when he was in the city of Yergin, Samach Pressburg, Bupan is Damalei Kishemasarti Ha Mitrekel Hasar Hamiyuad Lazem. I assume the matrekel is his coat. He gave it over to the coat check. Hisraim Lufanai, he complained to me, the non-Jewish coat check person. It's not right that the Jews use non-Jewish names. The Hainu Ungaria par Francesia Ukidoma. Those were two popular names at that time. Kulam machshivim hagoshon v'hashemish shelahem. What they're doing is they're showing that they consider it an honor to have those names. They're using those names as a sign of dignity and importance. The Jews who were the oldest nation, Hema Boshim Atzmam Likros B'Shem Etzem. They're embarrassed to go with their original names. They call themselves Yaakov or Shimon or Levi. The Jews are changing their names to the non-Jewish names. It's the greatest embarrassment.
Answer.
I didn't have, I wasn't able to respond. I told them, look, this is what happens in the Golos. But he means to say that even the non-Jewish coat check guy was sensitive to the fact that the Jews, why did they have to do that? Who are they trying to impress by using a non-Jewish name when they are the most ancient culture and they should consider their names to be precious, Yaakov, Yitzchak, Yosef, and instead they come up with these secular names.
So that would be an argument against the Yiddish names.
Maybe. Okay, we'll see. He says this is there's a fulfillment of what the pasuk says. Kidor tapuchos hema, banim lo emun bam. The pasuk says that they are tapuchos means that they do things rebellious or upside down. Hefech, banim lo emun bam. Children that I can't trust. Shavasenu v'chal daras sheyofneim hayu aleim ol hagalos b'tokfo. In previous generations, they had to carry the burden of Golos. And they didn't consider the Jewish names to be a disgrace. They found that his name was a distinction. That Ish Yehudi was Mordechai, that he was dignified with in their culture. Keser Shehu Yehudi, but nonetheless he made himself a crown that he's Jewish. V'kimo v'chugasayim lo seilecho, and he's mekayim the pasuk that says v'chugasayim lo seilecho v'avda eschem in the mamim. V'achshav shehukol kovod hagolos ve'ena Yisrael mevuzim beinu umos, and nowadays that the golos is not as intense, and the Jews are they're more accepted among the Goyim because the barriers of the ghetto were coming down already in his time. This is in the 1800s. Hey, mishanim shma u'sham kidei gadamas atzma lumas olam v'yesh lahamritz zeh b'kroa Hidor tapuchas, that you could put that into the puzzle. Hidor tapuchas means that they do things upside down. But that you can't trust them. I know she'enam rotzim b'shem hamegadlum osam. They don't want the names of their parents. Umeatmiya sharei amro b'yuma daf lamed ches l'asuluko b'shem ishu Russia. The Rishai lo maskina b'shemayo shenemar Shem Rishai Mirkov. And he says it's a power because you're not allowed to use the name of a Russia. V'osam anoshim karan atzim b'shem hagayim. V'harei b'zeh marim shem achshivim esagayim yoser mi Yisraelim. By doing so, they're showing that they value the non-Jew more than the Jew. V'harei omaya haderach likro shem b'nei v'nesem al shem avoseihem. Harei omaya haderach likro shem b'nei v'nesem al shem avoseihem. The minhag always was to name children after their grandparents. Or after great tzaddikim, we're going to Migdal Mehem. Hayum hachashuvim the hachadashim mevazim. One second, I lost it here. But nowadays, hachadashim mevazim. I was saying they embarrass their parents. The gedulayim, the kedushayim, umachshivim u'sham b'farim shem hagayim. Because instead of using the Jewish name Abraham, they use some non-Jewish name, Leopold or whatever. I hope nobody here is a Leopold. When they brought Bikurim, they said these Sukkim that they were a Goy Gadol, which means that they were prominent. I know the Darsha B'Sifrisha Mitsuyanim Sham, that they were distinguished. I know Milashim Shem, V'Hainish Mitsuyanim Gam came B'Shem. They had unique names. Avod Bisha Avdo Imanu Avodas Farach Afil Hachi Nitnu L'Kros Atzam B'Shem Hagoyim. Even though they worked like slaves, but they didn't allow themselves to lose their names. B'Shem Yudagayim L'Vuzu L'Kolon, and their names were not an embarrassment. And then he quotes the Tosas in Maseches Gittin, Kostos Begittin, B'Shem Rabbeinu Tam, Shechask Shom, Hask Shem Nacher Beget, I feel get She'en Tzrichlios Nizul Lichtov Kol Shemos. The Rabbeinu Tam says that in a get, if somebody became a mummer, and now you have to write a get for the person, he became a heretic. So and he took on non-Jewish names. Chas v'shalom, that you shouldn't write non-Jewish names in a get. Mitam zeh b'Poland ein kosim mishum get kini shem geyos sheyesh liyehudi ki yitzav b'sefer chedushi anshe shem. He says that's why in Poland they don't write any non-Jewish names in gets. The unehi the maran hagam achsam sofer kosim b'shuvas Ebenezer the kevin shikara atzmo b'shem ahu zricham lahaskir gam beget. Some services you do have to include the get. The time of nukem imo b'ani mazer kam apamim b'droshos Yisraelu. He says, but I disagree. I hold that you shouldn't use the non-Jewish name. Yoma Yishati Espani V'Nosa Al Isser Hahu. Ezra Hashem Yisbarach Shamati Sheyumadu Chashom Asuk Masem Shal Hakalam Hanal. Nobody follows their what they do with the names. Roy Chobar Yisrael Nemal Hashem Etaraso Hazis Many Besos. It's Hasarim Mashmusa Akocha. Okay, it's basically saying that that Tosa says that that you're not allowed in a get. You're not allowed to put in a non-Jewish name into a get.
But I was talking specifically about someone who converted to the.
Yeah, that's what Rav Weiss is going to argue. That's you can't bring a ride from that Tosus, because that Tosus is talking about somebody who became a mur. But here they're not becoming a mur. So before I show you Rav Moshe's tshuva, but that's the main arguments of Rav Weiss's number of the Maram Shik is the number one. The Jews in Mitzrayim didn't change their names. Number two, the pasuk says, and the Rambam says that it means that we should not emulate the Goyim in any which way or form. And number three, he says that it's a bizayin for Klal Yisrael, that they have, if they have to come out to somebody else, to non-Jewish names, that means that they don't feel that their names are precious. And finally, he says that the fact that they choose other names is a bizayin, that they shows that they don't hold the choshev of the Jewish names. Now, this point that he quotes the Rambam about Chusayim Osalechu, if you look on page 10, the Shulchan Aruch says, "Ein holchem b'klukas hagayim." You're not allowed to follow the ways of the goyim. V'lo midamelem. You're not allowed to emulate them. V'lo yilbash b'malbushim miyuchalem. You should not wear their types of clothing, their styles. V'lo yigdol b'tzitzis rosho. You're not allowed to have, I guess, curls in your hair like they have. You're not allowed to have a tamahawk haircut. And you're not allowed to cut the hair from one side to the other, and you leave something in the back. And you should not build things that look like temples of Avodah Zarah. That's what the Mechaber says. Ramah says, "Ella yehe muvdal mehem b'malbusha v'shar ma'asav v'chol zeina aser al b'davar shenago gayim v'shem pritzas." The Ramah makes a big mapech here. He says that the isser is only if they're doing it for pritzas, kigon shenago gilbash malbushim adumim v'hu malbush sarim, that they're wearing, let's say, red clothing, and red was considered to be a color of pritzas because it draws attention. The malbushe tzar ukadama malbuzem malbushe apritzas. Oh, bedavar shenago minag v'chok vein tam bedavar the ikul meichash be mishum darkei hamori. He says another thing you're not allowed to emulate is if they have a custom and we don't know why it's customary. So if we don't know, it must be that there was some religious significance. So that's considered darkei hamori. Ikul meichash, right? Avadavar shenago l'toelas kagon shedarkon shekol mi shehu rofe mumcha yesh lo malbush miuchad. If somebody's a doctor and he has a special uniform, otam acher mutter. So if he's doing it with toelas, he's doing it in order to. He's doing it because people need to know that he's dressing like a doctor or a policeman or a fireman. Okay, so the Ramah tones down what the Mechaber says. The Mechaber says you're not allowed to be medamet. He says lo medamen lehem. You're not allowed to emulate them at all. Actually, this is the Haggadah. The Ramah says that, and that's what the Rambam says. The Rambam says you're not allowed to emulate them, but the Ramah says only in two situations. Either if it's pritzis, or because that's a non-Jewish thing, or if it's a if it's some type of chok that they have, and we don't know the reason, so then we assume that it had some kind of religious significance. So based on this, Moshe talks about. Did I put it in here? Yeah. Moshe has a tshuva about whether you're allowed to wear clothing. There was a tshuva. Somebody asked him. He came from Europe, and in Europe, the city that he was from, everybody wore special Jewish clothing. Now he wants to know in America, is he obligated to continue that minhag of wearing? He doesn't want to dress Hasidish anymore. So Moshe says. Is this the piece that I wanted? No. Oh, here it is on the right side, on page 9. Moshe says here, "Bidvar malbushim b'medina zu yesh shas iser malbushim nachrim." If you're wearing non-Jewish clothing, is an iser malbushim nachrim. Poland, Jews that come from Poland are allowed to wear American clothing. So he says, okay, so look at the second paragraph. He says, "Inishitas amarik b'sharish peches selekashum din shenistach luvos begad macherim men nachrim." The marik, the Ramah that we saw, is based on the marik, who was an earlier Rishon. So marik says that the iser of chukas goyim is not if you want to wear clothing like the goyim wear. Rak im levishes nachrim who preaches either one of two things: either if it's preaches, v'darach gaiva v'yisrael and ligu shel levoshin yesh b'zeh iser. And if either for preachers or for arrogance. V'cheinim hu b'lo shum tam v'tzarach ela l'chok hevel l'shtus she'aser she'alavisha b'zeh mara shurach l'hidam asalem. If they're doing it for some secret, unknown reason, so the fact that you're following their shtus shows that you want to be like them. Then lo miyasek advarim hatmuim la'ela u'b'zeh mashma she'aser avshlo and higo adayin Yisrael klum. U'pasuk ken Ramah. Acharama naka betam iser inyan hasheni shibush v'asam shuhu below tam utzarach tam acher dikamek sheish bo mishum darkei amori. The Ramah says that it's only usher if there's no reason, and then we're chayshish that maybe the reason why they're doing it is for some religious reason. But the Marik says that that if there's no reason to do it, so then the only reason why the Jew wants to do it is to emulate the Goyim. So he says. So basically, he says, look at the next paragraph. The Marik says that it's only us if you want to emulate the Goyim. He says, and then he quotes about the doctors that they wore the special outfits, and then he says. I forgot to underline the parts I want you to see. If you look at the second column, at the end of the first paragraph, 4 lines from the bottom. There is no issue about regular clothing. Even though the guy wear these kind of same clothing, because we're not wearing it to be like the guy, we're wearing it because you need clothing, and that's what's in style. The Gambelisa ain't shaykh isra malbushi nachrim the kemat kol bnei Yisrael loshim malbushim elu. And came be omer shem malbushi nachrim Yisrael loshim become malbushem madu lo nomer shebetchila heim malbushi Yisrael. And he says furthermore, who says it's not Jewish clothing? Maybe the Goyim are copying the Jews. Who said the Jews are copying the Goyim? The fact is that most of the designers are Jewish. So Ramesha basically he says that I'll look at the next paragraph. He says, "You can af elo shebo mipol lakan mishon l'slavish b'gadim shaloshim mikan the keni she'ein iser b'klal b'gamal l'nichshu and b'bushin nachem klal harehu ke mishanim b'big Yehudim shemakim echad b'big Yehudim shemakim acher she'ein shabbos and mishum chashisha." Ramesha is not even considered a minhag to be machmer because basically you were wearing in Poland they were wearing Jewish clothing, and now it also is like Jewish clothing because this is what the Jews wear. All the Jews wear this kind of clothing. No, they don't. In America, they don't wear, except in the Hasidic neighborhoods, they don't wear Hasidic clothing. So, according to the Maram Shik bases himself very heavily on the Rambam that says that there's an issur of chukas hagoyim because anything you do, Rambam's lashon is hakol ben yedachu mazish lo yidam alehem. We're not allowed to emulate them. So, but according to Ramosha, we're not emulating them. This is the style, at least in terms of clothing. That's the style. So you want to wear just like a doctor's allowed to wear a doctor's. You could wear what do you call those things that you wear? The blue things, scrubs. You know, like Barry's wearing. So you're safe. It's not chukas l'goyim because you're wearing it. You see, Baruch Hashem, because you're doing it.
All the doctors are choosing.
Uh-huh. But the truth is that the Rambam is not the Ramah is mash. The Maram Shik brings proof that you're not allowed to change your name from the Rambam. The Rambam's language is not the same. The Rambam doesn't sound like the Ramah. The Ramah says that it's only two things: either you're doing it because of pretzes, it's chukas l'goyim, or if there's some unknown, mysterious reason, and why you're doing it must be you're doing it because you want to be like the goyim. But the Rambam's lashon is not mashal that at all. The Rambam says anything you do to imitate the goyim, and he says. You show move the mehem you do b'malbusha. The Jew should be looked different in his clothing. Just like in values were different. And the Rambam is very much mashma, not like the Ramah. So the truth is, the Ramah, the Mechaber doesn't. The Ramah is not necessarily explaining the Mechaber. The Ramah maybe is disagreeing with the Mechaber. The Mechaber quotes the Rambam in the what page was that? Where we had the Shulchan Aruch, on page 10. The Rambam quotes the Mechaber quotes the Rambam. Ein hochem bechukas hagayim v'lo yuvish mabushem yuchad lehem v'lo yigdol tzitzis rosh. All these things. He doesn't say anything about that if there's no reason to do it or it's because of preachers. The Ramah is the one that says that. I saw that they say the Vilna Gaon disagrees with the Ramah. The Vilna Gaon, it's a long Vilna Gaon. It was hard for me to follow, but he disagrees with the Ramah. So it would seem that there's a machlokas here between the Mechaber and the Ramah. According to, although I mean, I don't know the Svardim if they follow the Rambam usually. So what's their heter to wear regular clothing? For the Rambam's masha, anything that doesn't if you look like a non-Jew, it's asur. Anything, whether it's the hairstyle or the clothing style. I don't know, but anyway, so this point in Maram Shik, he makes 2 points. He makes one point is because the Medrash says that they didn't change their names, and the second point he makes is because there's an issue of chukas hagayim. So on the issue of chukas hagayim, we have the Ramah to be samechandet. The Ramah says that's not called chukas hagayim. If you want to have a non-Jewish name, especially if the reason why you want to have a non-Jewish name is so you could function in a secular society. When I have a lot of problems because on my birth certificate, my name is David Jacob, and when I went to school in English, I was called David. That was my name, but my parents called me Yankee, and all my friends called me Yaakov David. And when I got my driver's license, I put on my driver's license. I had to put on my driver's license David because that was what I had on my birth certificate. And the OU, I'm Yaakov. But then on my Social Security, I couldn't get Social Security because I'm David and Yaakov, David. And when I go to the drugstore, it gets mixed up all the time because they have me recorded. Some of the doctors know me. Now I'm careful. I only use David because that's what's on my birth certificate. But a lot of the doctors know me as Yaakov. So sometimes they have prescriptions under Yaakov and sometimes under David. I keep on telling them I'm the same person. Can't you combine the accounts? But my mother gave me the a non-Jewish, an English name because that was that was common then. Right. They wanted us to be able. My mother told me that when you go to English studies, don't use Yankee. You can use Yankee in Hebrew, but in English studies, you're David, because and my father, alav shalom, was Marvin. He had that was his name. When he moved to Eretz Yisrael, he decided it's enough with Marvin. He's going to become Chaim. So he changed his name to Chaim. But the reason why we had English names, I mean, now it's not, I don't know now it's not that common anymore, but our parents wanted us to be able to function in a secular society without having a name that the Goyim can't pronounce, Chaim or something. So they gave us English names.
Because your mother thought you'd be a doctor, so
that's right. I don't know about that, but why, it's no good to be a doctor? Can't say that here.
You have to ask the patients that.
Yeah. So anyway, so bottom line is there seems to be a very big machlokas, the Rambam, and the Ramaz disagreeing with Ramaz based on Marik. So according to the Shulchan Aruch it sounds like you're not supposed to do something that makes you indistinguishable from the Goyim. You have to be distinct.
The Mishnah on the side of the Rambam quotes something that sounds a lot more like the Ramah.
Like the Ramah, yeah. What does he say?
In the first narrow line, starting with the first or second narrow line, or no, a few lines down from that.
Yeah, he quotes the Marik.
Oh, he quotes the Marik.
Yeah, he quotes the Marik. So okay, so that's the question. Is the Marik? Okay, that's the question. Is the Ramah explaining the Mechaber? The Gra says that we don't pass it like the Marik. So the Gra obviously held that the Rambam is not in agreement with the Ramah.
How did the Minchas Usher come out in the end?
Oh, we have to come back next week and see. It's right. It's a good child. What do you have? You have a whole week. You can hang on to your name for this week, and next week we'll see if it's okay to stay Jack. Okay, I'll see you next week.